Hello and welcome to Champ Select, your go-to competitive Legends of Runeterra podcast. I'm Noble.
And I'm Hugh.
No Alex this week, unfortunately. He is still out of town with his family. So it'll just be me and Hugh walking you through a regular episode, and he'll be back next week. All right. So this week, we're going to talk about tempo, both the concept and the type of deck. Go a little bit about what tempo decks look like in Legends of Runeterra, why the concept of tempo is so important in this game, and I do actually think it is much more important than in other card games like Magic. And so, I'm very excited to talk about it. I think this topic's really deep. But first, we're going to start off with a user question, just because this user question is something that we usually start episodes with talking about. And this episode comes from our Discord.
This question comes from.
Yes. What did I say?
You said this episode comes from.
Yes. As always, it comes from the wonderful support of our Discord. So I think, this is from Dragon in our Discord, and he says, what are the decks you folks are currently using for your climb, and what rank has it gotten you to? Hugh, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah. I've pretty much I started just jamming pirates because, as usual, that was sort of my go-to last season. Got me pretty much from, honestly, like Plat 1 to like 80 LP Masters. So like,
last season.
Last season. Yeah, last season. I'm not at 80 LP Masters yet. Cool. That is not where I'm at. So I started with that because we had an expansion, so new meta changes.
Nice to play aggro.
Yeah, exactly. Playing an aggro deck into a meta shift is just a very safe choice because people are sort of figuring things out, and aggro generally preys on any sort of brew that someone tries to bring to the ladder. But now I've been pretty much exclusively been playing Lee Zoe. Which
deck that we talked about last week on the podcast,
exactly.
And on a Reddit post that y'all should check out, which is a guide that Alex wrote.
Yes, and which got a surprising amount of attention.
Which I was happy about, and we'll probably do stuff like that in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Anyway, I've been playing mostly that. It's one of the best decks right now, arguably the best one. It's just has game against everything. It feels like I never feel like I'm going to lose just when my matchup shows up, which is similar to how I felt about Pirates. I always felt I could win by playing well.
Could win most matchups.
Yeah. And it's been doing really well for me. I think I have a 73% win rate or something.
Yeah,
so
if
it's
you
pretty
check
high.
If you check out the matchups page on Mobilytics, which is a really good resource if you want to check like win rates and matchups, the list of good matchups is like 10 decks long, and the list of bad matchups is like 4 decks long, and they all have like a 0.2% play rate or something ridiculous.
What are the bad matchups?
Scouts isn't great. It's definitely beatable. And then other aggro decks are not as bad as Scouts, but also not great. And I believe Go Hard is closer than most other matchups, but I think in general it's pretty good. I think Fiora Shen might also be a not ideal matchup, but I haven't personally played it very much, so I don't know. I know that if the Zoe Fiora deck that was people were playing before Zoe Lee kind of caught on was a really good mirror breaker, mostly because the card standalone just like made your elusive creatures eat their elusive creatures and be very, very hard to kill. And then they had a lot of protection through Hush too. Like I hushed plenty of things to trade, and then they would have like another standalone or a Chain Vest or whatever, and it would be a big blowout.
Yep. That sounds right.
So where are you at right now?
I think I'm still at low diamond. I just hit diamond last night. I haven't been playing a ton, which is really at the end of the day, the key to climbing ladder is just playing a lot.
Absolutely. So for me, when I started out this season, like Hugh said, the kind of thing that you want to do is play an aggro deck. And I was like, well, I get started at Plat 4, 0 LP, so I can win and lose however long I want and still be in Plat, and then the climb to Masters from there is like relatively easy. So I didn't feel like I needed to like get started on the Masters grind, especially because when this season started around the holidays, when I was with my family, was not an ideal time for me to like try to play Legends of Runeterra for like 6 hours a day. So I kind of just like noodled around and played like 4 to 5 games with like 10 different decks. Like I played some of the Riven Lee deck, which was pretty cool. I played like 3 different Scargrounds decks that we had fun with. I tried various Zoe decks, various Grand Plaza decks. So, but those all leveled out to having like almost exactly a 50-50 win rate. At least it was just still at Plat 4 ZRLP, which actually means I could have been winning or losing more than I was winning, but like not dropping out of Plat. And then recently when I like actually started to climb, I have a pretty absurd win rate with Lee Zoe. I had like a 70% win rate to Lee Zoe, which got me up to Plat 2. And then I tried out Feel the Rush, and then which I had a 50-50 win rate over like 8 games with, which is not a ton of games, but which kind of stagnated me. And then I also lost a couple playing some Grand Plaza decks that I was testing out for the Gauntlet. And then some of my time being devoted to Gauntlet mean I haven't done a ton of climbing, but I'm currently like 4-0 with Fiora Shen after kind of getting turned on to it by another deck guide Reddit post on the Legends of Runeterra competitive subreddit, which if you aren't on, you should check out. Tons of deck guides. We post articles on there quite frequently. We also link them in our Discord, but you know.
Yeah, speaking of which, I just realized I completely forgot about the Gauntlet. I kind of wanted to, I feel like we should, not right now, but like I feel like in the future we should try and talk about the standard Gauntlet when it comes up every other week, because it feels like it's just rotating standard Gauntlet into
best of one is I think kind of where they're set.
Yeah, best of one, and then the other
not
week
best of one. I meant
singletons.
Singleton.
Yeah, the singleton 3 region deck. Yeah. Anyway, I feel like we should probably make an article about that or something. Just our strategy.
I agree, yeah.
Anyway,
Alex is been playing mostly Zoe Lee and is also in low diamond, so we're all hoping to hit masteries over the next week. So by the time we record our next episode, which will be a little later next week because of Alex's schedule, he keeps messing things up. So we'll get that episode out, and hopefully I'll be masters by then. So
you know. I doubt I will be. I still don't have a. It's not urgent. I don't have. Playing the Gauntlets is like a weird amount of time. Like it took me like.
Especially if you want to like test out some decks real quick or whatever.
I didn't really test out, and I played like 3 games of Tom Raka, and then I just slammed it in my lineup because I thought it would be good. But we can talk about that at a later point. I feel like we should just dive into tempo and
for sure. Okay, so tempo. This is both a shorthand that's used for a type of deck that's in card games. A lot of this was pioneered by early Magic the Gathering content creators. I believe the Dojo was the name of the website that a lot of early stuff was published on, but later like Channel Fireball and stuff like that, big teams who are doing a lot of like kind of like card game theory that's like a little more foundational at this point, of just like the ideas of what aggro, mid-range, and control decks are. And we'll go over a quick briefing of all of those. But tempo is also a concept. All decks revolve around tempo in some way or another, and I think more in Legends of Runeterra than in other games. And tempo is just kind of it's basically board position, and in Legend of Runeterra also kind of mana position, and it's basically kind of like who you can think of it as like who has the initiative, like who is the person who is like up tempo is the person who is pressuring their opponent, who is
the aggressor.
The beatdown is, that's another famous magical article, is who is the beatdown.
Who's the beatdown? Yep.
And that is the person who is like winning on tempo. And that can change a lot, and what exactly that looks like depending on the matchup. For example, you could have a 2/2 in play and your opponent could not have anything in play, but considering that it is turn 5 and your opponent is playing Feel the Rush, and at 18 life, you do not have the tempo advantage. Even though you have a 2/2 in play, you are not pressuring them faster than they are going to win the game. And so you are the one that needs to act. They can just pass until they get enough mana to play their big spells, and if you don't and just keep attacking with a 2/2, you are going to lose. So in that way, it's kind of who has the initiative. Do you have anything else you wanted to say about it?
That's a good way of explaining it. I think about it a little differently. When I usually thought about tempo, I thought about it more in a Hearthstone perspective, which was much more of just every single turn gaining a small incremental advantage every turn. Like the Hearthstone example would just be putting something on the board and then killing whatever they played, and then they play another thing, and then you kill it, and then put another thing on the board, and you slowly get more and more things in play, and eventually they just sort of lose because you've accrued more of a board presence than they have. That's how I think of tempo, as just slow, small, like a death by 1,000 cuts kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know?
So a different game. So obviously a little different concept, but it's like if at the end of the game, you didn't win the game by having more cards in your hand, card advantage, and you didn't win them by killing them before they could deploy the cards in their hand, which is winning on life and aggro. But you won the game by just making basically like efficient trades and like just kind of staying ahead on board. And then they just didn't have the mana or the resources to catch up. I think in Legends of Runeterra, this manifests a lot in the later turns of the game, where if you can play multiple spells in a turn and they can play only one spell in a turn, and you get to do something like Will of Ionia their one spell and play 2 4-cost units on turn 10, and the thing you Will of Ionia was an 8-cost unit, and they couldn't do anything with those other like 3 to 5 mana, then you are in a very good position to win the game.
I think the biggest way to lose and gain tempo in this game is knowing exactly when to bank spell mana and when to use spell mana. That is that's the biggest swing in tempo that I experience in all of my games. It's just, you have those turns where you just had to use all your resources to either stop what they were doing or attempt to execute your main game plan, and maybe they stopped you, maybe they inhibited you slightly, and you go into the next turn with nothing but, let's say, 6 mana and 0 spell mana. You just have 6 regular mana crystals to play whatever you've got, and they have 6 and 3 spell mana, and that's just, suddenly they are up tempo, they get to be the aggressor, and they get to pressure you into making subpar plays because they suddenly have functionally a 3 mana advantage against you.
Yeah, almost for the rest of the game sometimes, depending on
right
how it
if they play it properly, because and then ways you can regain that tempo advantage is by making, like you said, efficient trades. Like if someone plays a Ruination and you deny it, that's
huge exchange.
Exactly.
And that is a 1-for-1. So you're not up cards, but you are up a bunch of tempo.
Yep.
So it's like kind of the intersection between mana and board presence, and leading towards mana.
And priority in this game, because you go back and forth, because playing Ruination is also somewhat difficult in this game, because if you just play Ruination from the start, kill their whole board,
then they reload, and if you have the attack token that turn, you do that, and then they reload and then get to open attack you.
Yep.
But if they have the attack token, they get to open attack the other way.
Exactly.
So kind of that intersection. That's why slow spells are really vulnerable to getting out tempoed, because they take up a whole priority, and if they have like more priority because they get to like play, for example, Risen Mists is a really high tempo card, because you get to create a creature, play a creature, then you use a slow spell to remove one of those creatures, and then they're still up a creature and have the attack token and can now attack, kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right. Do we want to talk about what different types of decks are, so we can just kind of just lay a groundwork to have some more discussions about decks in specific situations?
Sure. I feel like the best example of tempo for me right now is actually Zoe Lee.
Yeah.
Because
agreed. Yeah.
Yeah. Zoe is, I think, the best example of a tempo card in this game.
Yeah. Certainly.
She is 1 mana, so you get to play her immediately, and you get to attack with her immediately, hopefully.
Yeah.
Every time she hits your opponent, she draws you a good card.
Yeah.
So it's +1 card, and it's a card of your choice. Kind of. Obviously, there's 8 possibilities you can see, but when you're seeing 3 out of 8, there's a reasonable chance you see at least one of the couple things you're looking for. And she's just a threat from turn 1 that you hopefully get to protect over the course of the game. And as long as she is in play and she gets to attack your opponent needs to
do something about it.
Answer it somehow, and it's probably not the beatdown. Exactly.
Even if they're not dying, you are exerting pressure because you're going to win on a different axis.
Yeah, because eventually, if Zoe hits you 7 times in a game, I
I would struggle to see someone winning that game.
Exactly. So
and if you do, it's because you've kind of played a big haymaker. Like you can lose a game where you've hit 7 times if they just play Field Rush.
Yep. If they slam an FTR and you just have no answer and you're just like, well, I guess I'm dead now.
Yeah. So real quick rundown of how I view most decks in this game. So the kind of traditional 3 are aggro, mid-range, and control. And then those are the kind of the 3 fair decks, and based on like how they want to win the game. And then there's also like combo decks that are putting together a group of cards to do something like quote unquote unfair. And then tempo decks, which some people describe as aggro control, and that like you're beating them down while trying to inhibit their options, both because of the pressure that you're exerting. Like they have to play their, for example, their Bright Steel Protector that has a good Enters the Battlefield ability, but not use its Enters the Battlefield ability because they need to block your Mountain Goat. That was a tempo play that won for you. You ended up a gem and you made them waste the full value of their card, and you got arguably the full value of yours. And then there's also a kind of more nebula, like, and then there's also prison decks, which don't exist as much in this game, though I do think there is a prison deck or two. So aggro decks are pretty self-explanatory. They're looking to curve out. They're looking to pressure your opponent's life total. In this deck in particular, I think of aggro decks versus mid-range decks as decks that don't run a ton of ways to interact directly with your opponent's units, and look to win by life total as fast as possible. Ideally, they kill your opponent before they get the chance to develop all the resources in their hand, though sometimes there are some pretty powerful aggro cards, top ends, like Captain Farron, that can mean that even if your opponent has time to deploy all their cards, they're just dead to the inevitability of just taking like 12 plus damage to the face. And then there's also not using spell mana as much, so not having as many spells, or often going to very low mana on turns, like wanting to use all your mana on turns like 1 through 4, and then maybe on turn 5, like playing a 2-drop and banking spell mana for a Decimate next turn or a Noxian Fervor, in the example of Pirates, which is, you know, what I was just thinking of because of aggro. But also, if you think about discard aggro, also doesn't have a ton of spells. Mostly is discarding things with like Rummage, which is a spell, but
I think discard aggro is a much more like bread and butter example of an aggro deck than Pirates is, just because it's super low to the ground, super fast, and very greedy kind of. It's it can kind of just get blown out by a single Withering Wail. Yeah. Like it's very fragile in that sense, but it's also incredibly explosive.
Yeah.
You can die on turn 3. Like you can just be at 0 on turn 3.
Yeah.
Against
and then
discard.
Also lose to Jinx. So another thing that happens is because of how champions work in this game, and because there are some high impact cards like Captain Farron, you can feel like you're winning exchanges against an aggro deck all day, and they can still just like
clutch
win
it out
because they have like those really explosive turns, and you just need to know the matchups and know to say, like, I actually lost a game to discard aggro earlier today because I cast a Vengeance on a 5-power Draven instead of saving it for the Jinx that they played next turn, and then the Jinx won the game.
Yep.
So mid-range decks are the biggest blur of the lines in my mind is the tipping point between aggro and mid-range and control. Mid-range is, I mean, just the word mid-range really evokes kind of being in the middle.
Yeah.
I think mid-range decks more than aggro decks are looking to do 2 things in this game. They're looking to, you know, control the board. Almost every mid-range deck is board-centric. I actually think that every mid-range deck is board-centric. I think that things like Feel the Rush, which I wouldn't consider as a board-centric deck necessarily, are control decks. I think it's a control deck, not a combo deck.
Same.
And trying to control the board like Fiora Shen, which might at first glance look like some kind of combo deck, but I think is really truly a mid-range deck. Look to control the board, be up on board, so up tempo and pressuring your opponents. A big chance for tempo swings that I think mid-range decks and by extension tempo decks, which can look pretty similar to mid-range decks, honestly, have in this game is there's like a critical turn. Like there are critical exchanges that you only want to initiate if you know that you can win. Do you kind of get what I'm going at? Do you know what I'm talking about, this kind of concept? Okay, so I'm thinking of it like those turns where, you attack and they block and then play a trick, and then you have a trick, and then they have a removal spell, and then you have a counter spell or whatever, right?
Right.
So like there are these critical exchanges where each person is investing a bunch of resources, both mana and cards, into an exchange. And whether or not you win those exchanges is a huge part of Legends of Runeterra, in my opinion.
Yes, absolutely. That's true. It's just interesting hearing your explanation of a mid-range deck, because by definition or by name alone, the term mid-range is a bit nebulous.
Yeah,
it's fairly vague, and it's one of the harder ones to pin down. And it's funny that you mentioned Fiora Shen, because I think of it much more as a control deck than a mid-range deck, personally.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because in my mind, a mid-range deck is something. I think like Ash Sejuani is like probably the best example of a mid-range deck that I can think of.
Mid-range deck, honestly.
Because it runs interaction,
Frostbite's Culling Strikes.
Right, but it's not the main plan of the deck. It's just to kill a very, very key card, and in order to let the rest of your deck fully execute its game plan, which is generally just slightly better creatures than your opponent for their cost, consistently.
Yeah. And then also a way that Ash Sejuani abuses tempo is cards like Harsh Winds can be really high tempo when your opponent invests resources into big attacks, and then you get to basically waste their whole turn because you Harsh Winds them, and your down cards, the Harsh Wind didn't directly remove any cards. I mean, you usually get good blocks, so you can be card positive, but even if they're just Harsh Winding things that they didn't block, for example, like big elusive creatures, and then getting to crack back for lethal, that's a huge tempo advantage, right?
Yeah.
Because you're getting that priority that we were talking about, and more opportunities to play spells and have the attack token.
Yeah, mid-range is just a very, very difficult archetype to pin down. Like control and aggro are much more.
Control looks to have more cards in hand than your opponent, looks to blunt aggression, and then win with some large finisher.
Consistently
like
2 for 1 over the course of the game, gather card advantage, not die early.
Keep your life total high.
Yep, keep your life total high.
A good amount of chump blocking.
Yeah.
Feel the Rush is just such a marquee example of what a control deck looks like, in my opinion.
I agree. Yeah, it's just a bunch of ways to stay alive, and at the end of it, they play a spell and you die.
Yeah, and all decks in this game need to be able to turn the corner. But control especially doesn't want to risk, because like some percentage of the games where you both get down to 0 cards, you're up like a card. It's not quite like Magic, where a control deck can just have a 3/3 in play and you're both drawing off the top, and as long as you have like a counter spell, you can keep trading 1 for 1 and just kill them with that 3/3. Because you can't counter units. You can't deny or nopify a unit. And some of the units produce insane value, like Captain Farron, and that value is very hard to interact with. So you need to turn the corner and actually finish the game.
And by turning the corner, we sort of mean just you mentioned the sort of critical turn before, and that's kind of what turning the corner is like for a deck like Lee Zoe. It would be the turn you try and develop Lee Sin on the board and have him live. Having that card live is just basically the whole turning point of that deck.
Yeah.
If you play it and suddenly they just hit it with a thermogenic beam because you played it on turn 5 with no spell mana, then I'm not going to say you lose that game, but that's just a huge, huge investment that you just lost for at a 1 for 1, and that's your win con.
Yeah. So I want to go back to that critical turn as an example of tempo. If we can imagine a scenario when you're playing Fiora Shen and you're attacking with a River Shaper, and they're blocking with a 3/2. And then the exchange goes something like, I Sharpshite my River Shaper, and then they hush it, and then you give it barrier, and then they try to deal damage to it with a with a fast spell, like they play Mystic Shot because for some reason they're playing both Hush and Mystic Shot. Let's say that they're playing Vimer. Good, great.
Okay.
And the 3/2 they're blocking with is a Mountain Goat. We did it. then you nopeify that spell, right? You are getting to a point where your thing is surviving because it has barrier. It's not drawing you a card. You're not up a particular amount of cards, right? They played their 3/2, their Mystic Shot, and their Hush, and you played your Sharp Sight, barrier card, and nopeify. That's a bunch of 1-for-1s. You're up a card in the end because their Mountain Goat dies and your River Shaper's alive, but you've also gained a massive amount of tempo. You are untapping, say you were blocking then you're getting the attack token with a River Shaper in play. That's a huge amount of tempo because it keeps gonna keep generating advantage, just like Zoe would. And since you won that crucial exchange, you're in a really good place to both be the aggressor and just continue winning and snowballing the game. Whereas if you didn't have that last nopeify, you got into a fight that you couldn't win. You are trading, and then you have lost a lot of traction on the board. You're going even on cards, and you're down tempo.
Yeah, it's a surprisingly difficult concept to like really explain in words. It's much easier to feel when you're playing the game. You can really just like feel like the pressure from your opponent, with your opponent's putting on you or you're putting on them in a given game. You can really notice it. It's just
and so like also there are times when I'll use Feel the Rush because I've played a couple of games of this deck recently, when you have like no spell mana and like 6 mana, and you don't have a play that you can really make because they also have like 6 mana. You can't play Catalyst of Aeons because it's going to their turn, and then they'll be able to like play a 3-drop and open attack, and that's really bad for you. So you have to just pass, and then they can like make you waste that mana. And that can feel really bad because you're down tempo, so you can't put yourself further behind by playing a card like Catalyst of Aeons or making a card that, or, paying like 5 mana for a Withering Wail or a Grasp there, and then getting blown out by like a Deny, because then they're untapping with 2 spell mana, you have 1 spell mana, and then they're getting to open attack you or whatever, can lead to really awkward situations, and you want to be the one putting your opponent in those awkward situations.
Yeah, that is another way of putting pressure on your opponent. And there's a lot of, because of this game's way
Priority system?
The priority system, basically, the turns back and forth, 1 action each. You get 1 action, I get 1 action, back and forth until both of you have passed. Then you go to the next round. It puts you in a lot of weird situations where you can just opt to not do anything for multiple
iterations, or play burst spells. Like, for example, having gems in your hand in the Zoe Lee deck is really good for this.
Yeah.
Because they're 1 mana. They don't take up your priority, but you can play a gem and pass, and then if they choose to pass, you then get the choice to either end the turn or play something, which makes burst spells like gems like pretty powerful.
Yeah, exactly. And you can put your opponent in some very awkward situations where they have no proactive play. That there's something they want to do, whether it be
Vengeance a unit,
play a Ruination. Like, there's something in their hand that they want to do, but this is a bad time to do it. And you continually play like small little 1-2 cost cards and maintain an amount of mana to hold up your answer while they have nothing good to do. And if you just play like they're waiting to like Ruination you, and you play like you have like 2/2/2s in play, they don't want to hit that, they don't want to cast Ruination into that, you play like a 3/3, and they still don't really want to use it there,
especially if they have like a unit, like if they have like a
right, if they have a unit, or you still have 7 mana left, you can just keep adding things to the board, and then you just play 1 more creature, like 1 more 2-drop, like you play a 3/2, and suddenly you have 10 power on the board, and they still don't really want to Ruination that because you have 5 more cards in hand.
And then you have like still 5 mana left, so if they Ruination, you get to play a 3-drop and a 2-drop and then open attack them or whatever.
And so they have to make the really awkward decision of, can I afford to click pass 1 more time? What happens then? Does my opponent attack, which is bad for me? Does my opponent pass back, which is also bad for me? Does my opponent play another small creature, which
is good enough for me? That's like the best
exactly,
case scenario.
and the fact that the best case scenario is still not actually that good for you is just a big example of playing big, slow spells and how you can mess with priority and how you can force your opponent into certain situations that are very, very subpar for them.
You want to be careful not to tap out in this game, not to put yourself to 0 mana, because then your opponent is free to. Like, you don't want to jam a 5-drop and then a 4-drop and then have them Runation, because you have like only 3 spell mana now. If you've like tapped out of deny and you can't deny it, you basically have no recourse. Like, you're just going to get Runation. You just walk right into it. There's also a lot of interesting things that come up. Challenger units are a good example of something that's really high tempo, kind of like what Hugh was just talking about. But if on turn 3 you play a Fiora and they don't have any units, and they don't want to play their small unit because you're just going to eat it, they don't want to pass, and then oftentimes they'll pass back to you, hoping you'll hit them for 3, and then they'll get, for example, if they're Feel the Rush, a chance to play Weirding Stones or Catalyst Veons, or if they are...
there's all sorts of small creatures that'll just...
Dreadway Deckhand is a really good one.
Yeah.
Anything that makes a barrel is something that people don't want to play after you've played a unit. Things with vulnerable. And then you just get to pass back without hitting them for 3 with that Fiora. You sacrifice hitting them for 3, but gain the 3 mana that they wanted to spend but didn't. Yeah,
there's a lot of weird little things like that with the priority in this game.
Yeah, and that specifically around like challenger units, I've noticed it come up a lot, and I wanted to bring this up and kind of discuss with you. Is Go Hard a tempo deck? TF Go Hard.
I think yes.
Yeah, I
personally
agree. There are so many plays in that deck that are so high tempo.
Yeah, I mean, Go Hard. The spell Go Hard in itself is a huge tempo play, especially in a deck that runs as many kegs as it does, because it's costs 1 mana, and if you have a keg out, it's going to deal 2, and dealing 2 damage to something is very frequently just killing a unit of your choice.
Yeah.
Especially in the very early turns that Go Hard is particularly relevant in.
Yeah. And also, there are so many aspects to why this is a good Go Hard deck, but like what we were just saying, like if you're trying to bank a Runation to get a good Runation off and they keep playing Pool Sharks, like it's hard to know what to do.
Yeah, because you don't want a Runation, 2 Pool Sharks and 2...
a Fortune Croaker and a Zap or whatever.
Exactly, yeah.
And then and then you just pass and they get to open you for damage or whatever.
Yeah, or they just pass back and their 2 Pool Sharks draw them 2 extra cards, and then suddenly you're sitting looking at your hand, you did nothing, they did 3 things, drew 2 extra cards, and now you're just even at a greater
behind.
Yep,
yeah.
Exactly.
Another big thing against when playing Go Hard is if they have like say a stack or 2 on their Go Hard. So let's say they have 2 stacks in their Go Hard and you'd like tap pretty low and they just have the time to go like Go Hard, pack your bags, open attack you or attack you that turn. It can be really, really brutal. I think pack your bags is actually the biggest culprit, because if that deck has pack your bags up, they are literally never tapped out as long as they have any mana. So you will always have to play like they're going to pack your bags, which hampers your ability to deploy units. If you don't have like a Nopify, it hampers your ability to just pass, because if they like pack your bags open attack, it really constrains you. Like you have to pass and waste mana when they have pack your bags up so often, and it's such a big part of the end game of that deck. Not to mention the fact that they can set up situations where late in the game they can go Commander Ledros, pack your bags, and you die, which is really high tempo. Like they're playing a hugely impactful spell, and it's only costing them 1 mana.
Yeah.
What are some other examples of tempo decks in Legends of Runeterra?
We already talked about Lee Zoe, right?
Yeah, Go Hard.
Yeah, Go Hard. I mean, I think those are the 2 best examples I can think of off the top of my head.
Old Elusives, I think, is a good example. I think Fizz is a tempo card, though he doesn't
really get played. There's a Teemo Fizz deck that I've seen kicking around on ladder. I've played against it 3 or 4 times. It's come up with Mind Meld as the top end.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I think I've seen
and
that
they
one.
play the, what is it, like Wiggly Bubblefish or something?
Oh, yeah.
The
Wiggly
3-1
Burblefish.
Burblefish. Yeah. And they just jam tons and tons of spells, and every time I play against it. The first time I played against it, I was just like, this deck is awful. What are they doing? I couldn't figure out their game plan. And then with 6 creatures in play, they slam a Mind Meld, or I think it's called Mind Meld, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and they just made their entire board 10/10s, and I was like, okay, that's what they're doing.
I see.
I actually ended up winning that game.
The Mind Meld is the one that sets everything to base 10/10?
Sets everything base number of spells
you've
you've played. So
I get that one and the one that raises everything. There are like
Give it
3
all?
Cadia cards that are really similar. Like one sets everything's power and toughness high. One grants the highest power and toughness and keywords to everything.
no, those are the same card.
No. Mind Meld, the card you're talking about.
Oh no, Mind Meld. Yeah.
And then Give It All.
Give It All is.
And then there's also the card that makes buffs permanent, which
Yes.
plays out similarly to the other one, but not as much. But I get those confused because they're all about buffing your whole board and buffs and stuff.
Yeah. I think for the most part that's about what we have to say on tempo.
Yeah, and I'm sure that when we answer some of these user questions and talk about other stuff, we're gonna digress about tempo. An example of a deck that is pretty low tempo but still manages to be good, in my opinion, is and maybe you disagree with this, but is Tom Soraka. How do you feel about that?
I think it is. I definitely agree that it's low tempo. Simply because you're playing a bunch of like 1 and 2 power creatures that are not very threatening, so your opponent can just not block. Your opponent can just like not worry about the board for like 6 turns in a row, because like, what are you going to do? Attack me with 5 1/2s?
You're like, oh, they're attacking me with 4 creatures. It's a 2/7, a 2/3, and a 2/4. Yeah, I can just take that.
And you can take that like 2 or 3 times. I mean, you've probably got a couple blockers by then. Like, there's just very little they do, and then they just start eating your board with Tom Kench, and then you slowly lose the game.
Yeah, that's one of those decks where you eventually have to go in on that critical turn, that big stack, and they win it more often than not mostly because Astral Projection swings it so hard.
Astral Protection.
Yeah. That's not as cool as Astral Projection.
I literally did not realize that card was called Astral Protection until 3 days ago.
Yeah, that's a little mind-filling hole. I'm reading a book series right now, and I just also had a revelation, like actually reading the names of like 3 different characters / creatures / spaces. It's just a funny little fill-in that you do. It happens with Bubblefish, but it's actually Burblefish, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that's probably right. Anyway, how do you want to wrap up the TLDR of tempo as a concept? It's such a deep concept. There's not much we can.
Yeah. So it's something that you can feel. Tempo decks are really powerful. You just be thinking consciously about how to gain tempo in your games. This is a huge part of whether or not to open attack, because it's really bad if you, for example, open attack with with 4 power of creatures. That's great. If you could add to the board and then they play like a 3/4 or a 4/5, like even just an expedition, like let's say you have a 2/2 and a 3/3, and you're like, I'm just going to play another 3/3, and then they play something like Bull Elnuk, like you put yourself in a position where you just can't attack, and that you just wasted your whole attack turn basically and let their 4/5 brick everything.
Yeah.
And so kind of keeping the initiative where you can, and I think that both of the decks that we think are the best right now, Zoe Lee and Gohard and Fiora Shen, are very powerful tempo positive decks. Fiora Shen's there's a little more of a balance between like having protection for your units than just kind of like it applies pressure in a different way. The reason those decks are so good is because they abuse the game's tempo system, so the game's pass system, and thus get positive tempo so well. And just knowing how to play those decks such that you're not running face first into blowouts, you're making your opponent make tough decisions as often as possible.
Yeah, I think if you're struggling with this concept, you're undoubtedly sick of hearing the word tempo by now, I'm sure. Yeah. But if you're just struggling with this idea, just go into a game and just think of it as pressure. Think of who's applying pressure, where they are, where they're applying it, when they're applying it, and just sort of try and feel it. It's much, much easier to feel who has a tempo advantage in your games than to just explain it in words. Like you know what it feels like. You if you've played the game, you definitely you've experienced it. You just might not have thought about it as this concept.
Yeah, and so consciously thinking about it. And with so many of the things that we talk about, knowing what your opponent's deck is playing, not only what cards it are in, but how that deck wins its games is hugely important. For example, there are those elusive decks that buff things with Starlit Seer, and the burst spell that draws a unit of your deck and buffs 3 if you have plunder, or the other way around.
I don't even try and ask me what that card's called. I forget too.
That's a great example of a deck that you always feel like you're winning against, and then suddenly they play a 10 power elusive and you're just so far from winning.
Yeah.
So knowing when you have to apply pressure, knowing that you needed to take more risks earlier in that game such that you could get them dead and make them deploy their units before they were fully buffed or whatever, and make bad trades or trade away their Starlit Seer instead of getting to keep taking damage.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the means, a great way to up your win rate is just play all the decks.
Yeah.
1 or 2 games. It doesn't have to be many. Just know what the deck wants to do and how it wants to do it. And all of a sudden, after 1 of 2 games of playing as the deck you're having, if you think a deck is broken and overpowered, play it. 1 of 2 things will happen. Your win rate will skyrocket because the deck is overpowered and broken and you were right, or you'll learn how to beat it.
Yeah.
Because it's not as strong as you thought.
Totally.
That is if you have the resources, you have the wild cards, you have the ability to craft it. Not everyone does, and that's totally reasonable. But yeah.
All right. So I think now we're going to get into a couple user questions that we collected from our Discord, just kind of to wrap up the episode. So first off, we have from Time, the spice, not the concept / dimension. And he asks, why hasn't Victor found a place in the meta? That card is not good tempo.
And to elaborate on that, it is 4 mana for a 2/4. Just think of what 4 mana is getting you on a lot of other creatures. It's generally a lot more than six
stats.
total stats on a creature. And he doesn't do anything when he comes down. He does something the next turn. He gives you his Hextech, whatever, his
Hextech core, but that still costs you mana and doesn't affect the board that much.
And it gives him a random keyword, so you don't have control over what he's getting. You don't have control over the value you're getting out of him. Sometimes it's a complete blowout because he gets the exact right one you want. Sometimes he gets just a terrible keyword that does absolutely nothing, and you're investing 4 mana into a card which can very, very, very easily have a similar value as a 2 mana card or a 3 mana card. And because of that, it's very hard to make a card like that. Just inherently, it's hard to make a card like that good.
And like if you're abusing the fact that he creates a card every turn and isn't like not playing it and like discarding it with Rummage or whatever, he does it worse than other options like Draven and Riven
and Ballistic Bot.
And also then he's even more just a 2/4 for 4. I think that this card could find a place, but it doesn't help that a lot of his package like Nyandroid and Ballistic Bot are also pretty vulnerable to being out tempoed because they trade poorly with 3 power creatures. Like even after you've taken the time to make them like 7 power, you really need to be doing something with them that's not just attacking your opponent, because they get chump blocked by 1 power creatures, like by 1/1s, and they also just trade with like any random 3 power creature.
And I think this is the reason the 1-drop, the X1 first strike or quick attack guy with augment and the Neandroid are both not seeing a whole lot of play. Ballistic Bot is seeing a ton of play, is because it's basically always going to trade evenly with a 2-drop or higher. And it's going to
not
drop.
Always on turn 2 though is one of the problems with Ballistic Bot, and
That's
why
true.
I actually like House Spider is a very good tempo card. It both pressures your opponent, so if they don't play anything, it just gets to attack for 3 damage, where Ballistic Bot would attack for 1, and it also can potentially block 2 creatures out of aggro decks.
Yeah, exactly. And Ballistic Bot's job is usually just to make a dummy card in hand that you can discard to something, which he does better than Victor.
Yes, correct.
And I think those are the biggest reasons that Victor hasn't really found a place. It would need to be, I feel like the deck where Victor would find a home in is some sort of like control deck. Honestly, with him as like a late game win con, you like play him on like turn 9 or something, and that's
maybe the answer is some kind of like lots of go hards and like withering whales and stuff, and like. So the thing is about this too is he takes up a champion slot. So when we're crafting this deck and we're like, okay, so we want control things, that probably means Shadow Isles, Withering Whale, maybe like Vengeance, Go Hard. Maybe like Funsmith, because that's a cool overlap. And then you're like, wait a minute, like Funsmith is doing more powerful things in this deck than Victor is, and Elise is a much better tempo card, Ezreal's a much better win condition, and you only have so many slots in your deck. It's hard to actually, even in that deck that we just kind of like spitballed, see Victor having a bigger impact than another champion. It's kind of unfortunately like Riven.
He does a lot of things fine, but nothing super well.
Yes, agreed.
Is a good, I think, a very short way of saying it.
Okay. So the next question comes from Twilight in our Discord. And they ask, if you guys were to rework Lee Sin, what approach would you take?
I love this question. I was so excited for this question when we got it. So I think that just Lee Sin, like just looking at that card alone in a vacuum, I think that card is pretty much perfect. I love Lee Sin. His design
as a 3/5 for 5.
As a 3/5 for 5.
Which is 3 changes later.
Just Just one balance wise, it feels very fair.
Right now,
his level of condition makes sense, and not in a vacuum. His surrounding cards, the package of cards that came with him, retreat. Basically the like two. The double cards, I don't know how to put this, but the cards that make a separate card
fleeting in your hand. So that's what is it called?
Sonic Wave turning into Resonant Strike, and Concussive Palm turning into the 3/2, and Retreat turning into the thing that puts out a 3-drop for 1 mana.
Yeah.
Basically all those cards, they work incredibly well with him.
Both fulfilling his level up conditions and like cool tempo plays.
Yeah, exactly. He's just a very interesting card. I think there are 2 ways to go about quote unquote reworking Lee Sin. One is straight up number changes, number tweaks.
Like less power,
more toughness, costs more, costs less, stuff like that. Just upping his level up condition to 10 spells versus 8 spells.
I don't think we really, and I think these are things that you should do if Lee Sin is too powerful, and I don't know for particularly at that point. I don't think the problem with the Lee Zoe deck is Lee Sin necessarily.
I think the biggest argument I've seen is that the interaction between him Dragon Raging something when he has Overwhelm is unintended and unhealthy, which
He's also very powerful with gems.
It's incredibly powerful. Yeah, when you
basically only play him with Targon.
Yeah, so that's reasonable. That's a reasonable take, and I don't necessarily disagree. Where we get into sort of the argument is it too good? And I don't think it's too good, but I do think that it could maybe be worked with, tweaked to feel less bad. I think if you're reworking Lee Sin, you are not reworking the champion, you are reworking Dragon's Rage.
Okay, so fundamentally kind of how he functions, but
yeah,
like
you're changing.
Don't want to change his champ spell, don't want to like
Right. I don't want to change his champ spell. I think his champ spell as Sonic Wave is great.
It used to be Dragon's Rage, and actually changing
that felt terrible.
Is now Sonic Wave is much better.
Yeah.
Feels much better.
Yeah, exactly. So I think where you'd change it is Dragon's Rage. Maybe you could say, for example, if at the end of the spell you just say remove him from combat, because people are complaining that his
so you could attack Dragon's Rage and it wouldn't trample over.
It wouldn't trample over even if he has trample, because he would be removed from combat. It would make it so that if he has 10 power, he only deals 10 damage, which I think is reasonable. I mean, because then in that scenario you still have to answer the Dragon's Rage. And then if you answer the Dragon's Rage, he gets to attack.
Yeah.
And neither of those options are good for you.
I've won plenty of games where I'm just like getting it to attack with Lee Sin every turn, not found a way to give him overwhelm, and just like hitting their face for 5 and killing a unit.
Because Dragon's Raging, because it's killing or recalling a unit, usually killing.
Yeah. I do think if you're removing him from combat, you might want to have Dragon's Rage not be a thing that's put on the stack, and because that way it's harder to disrupt. You could still disrupt it with something like Frostbite, but no longer with Spell Shield, which might help balance that a little bit.
Yeah, maybe, but I mean, if you're frostbiting him in that scenario, so all right, that's a good example. So currently, as it works, you frostbite Lee Sin with Dragon's Rage. He's Dragon Raging your unit. You frostbite him. Nothing happens, right? He recalls your unit.
He does recall your unit.
He does recall your unit.
Which is, I don't believe, intended. I think that might be a bug.
No. I think it's intended because it used to not.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Like a patch ago or 2 patches ago, I ran into this problem several times. I've lost several games to this. I've had my Lee Sin frostbitten. Dragon's Rage goes on the stack.
Mm-hmm.
It resolves, and their unit doesn't recall because, and I think the reason was because he quote unquote didn't strike it because he had 0 power.
Yes, but now they fixed that.
They fixed it so the unit does in fact get recalled.
Yeah.
And in this, let's say we added the text that I just mentioned, remove him from combat at the end. So currently your unit would get recalled and he wouldn't do any damage, right? In the new scenario, he would
be frostbitten.
He would be frostbitten.
Hit it for 0 damage. It would not be recalled, but he would be out of combat, so he wouldn't.
No,
die.
it'd still be recalled.
You want it to still be recalled. But...
Yeah, and then he still didn't deal any damage. The only difference is he got quote unquote removed from combat, but that didn't change anything.
But it does make it a little more clear.
But it just removes the ability to have overwhelm make him deal double damage.
Okay.
I think if your problem is his power is doubled by having overwhelm, then I think that's the best way I can think of to fix that without fundamentally changing anything about the champion, his champ spell, and really the cards associated with him and the original function intended from all of those cards. But yeah, I think if I was to rework that card, that's where I would do it.
Yeah. I think we can kind of actually extend this discussion. Do you have an idea for people have been talking about nerfs to Go Hard, and then now we should probably think about potential changes to Zoe, and then things that would make Victor and Riven more playable. Do you think that the answer to making Victor and Riven more playable is to tone down like Go Hard Zoe a little bit so that they just have a little more room to shine?
That's a good question. I think so let's start with Zoe. I think in Zoe's case, her biggest strength is that she costs 1 mana.
Yeah.
Obviously, as elusive, that's incredibly important. If she was a 1 mana 1/1 without elusive, card would maybe be good, but probably not.
Yeah.
Like
very much less likely to be good.
Exactly. So I think in this case, this is a good place to try number tweaks. Just make her a 2 mana 1/2 or a 2 mana 1/3, because the difference between getting to attack, like turn 1, Zoe attack, and suddenly if that's not a possibility, it's a completely different ball game.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to worry about that ever being a scenario, and that allows you.
Yeah, the possible attacks being 2 and 3 instead of 1 and 2 is very powerful.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a very, very big change. Yeah. And then, do you think that Go Hard needs a nerf? Deck has a very good win rate, even with people targeting it.
Yeah,
consistently.
It does, and Go Hard is. I don't know. I really don't know. That one's. Maybe it does, and the problem with Go Hard is less an argument of does it need a nerf. I think it's more of, if you were to nerf it, what would you do to it?
Yeah.
You can't, I don't think you can make it 2 mana.
Oh, I don't. So the only spell that I've changed that I've heard that I like to the front side is like, you could make it 4 copies, but I don't like that, I don't think. You could make it so that if the target is removed, it doesn't shuffle 2 things into the deck. So both spell shield and like stuff like glimpse or like single combating away the thing that is targeted would kind of slow down the ramp up of go hards in your deck.
I really like that idea, and I think it is going to generate a lot of feel bad situations that may end up being worse for the card. Although, given the overall what's the word I'm looking for? The impression of the card, how people feel about it, basically. People hate this card, I think. A lot of people.
I saw so many like I want Go Hard nerf for Christmas posts. Or like a rant about Go Hard, a thread, that kind of stuff on Twitter.
I've seen so many memes about people hating people playing TF Elise and just yeah. And so I guess if you just want the card to not exist, then any nerf is a good nerf. But I think that the deck should be allowed to exist, and maybe it is too powerful. And just because the knobs on that card are so hard to turn,
so I actually think you're wrong about that, because we could make Pack Your Bags 4 damage. I think that's a pretty big change. I think we could make, we could actually just make, like, think about it. Like, Pack Your Bags does not have to cost 1 mana. Like, what if it costs 3 mana? The card's so different.
That's true. That's actually totally true. I didn't really think about the back end.
Yeah.
Actually.
I agree. I had the similar thought process of like, there are not that many knobs in this card. And then you're like, oh, if that costs 3 mana, that problem of it never being like down, it always being an option for your opponent that we were talking about earlier that's so high tempo, is that, if it's 3 mana, it's trading more evenly with mana against the things that it's playing against, or when it gets denied. And it's also way harder to, if you get the first one countered or stopped, and then playing the second one is like always so frustrating because it stays as Pack Your Bags if it gets countered.
Yes.
Both of those I think really help. So.
Okay, yeah, actually, that's a really good idea. I like the idea of a Pack Your Bags being 3 mana instead of 1.
We could make everything else better. We could make Spell Thief be able to steal Pack Your Bags, and then it would be really scary to play that card. We could make Targon even better.
Yep. Targon does not need to be better. That is a potential topic for a future episode. Is Targon too strong?
Yeah.
Because low key, I think it might be.
Yeah, Targon is very, very powerful.
But we can talk about that at a later date. Anyway, so that's what are the cards? Oh, Victor and Riven.
Do you think my real question is, like, do you think that there are tweaks that should be made to those cards, or do you think that
the surrounding
the surrounding cards need to be changed? And I think it's likely that the surrounding cards need to be changed. I think both Victor and Riven, I can see scenarios when they're good. Specifically, I do really, the synergy between Riven and Lee Sin is like pretty sick.
It is pretty cool. Like, I definitely tried it.
Working like both the quick attack being one good, and then the overwhelm one obviously being good, and then the blade being basically a Zenith blade, I think is really cool. Kind of hard to pull off because the Reforged cards aren't great, and you run into like basically a Targon Lee deck, except you have more combat tricks and less like you're making less of your cards incidentally, so it's easier to go low on cards, and you're also missing out. Oh, you're not missing out on Deny, but you are missing out on like Bastion.
Yep.
And I would like it if that was a better trade-off instead of pretty clearly being Targon what you want to play Lee Sin with right now. And I don't know how to make that happen, but
yeah, that's actually a pretty good. So you mentioned just now sacrificing. Oh, never mind. You're sacrificing Targon, not Ionia.
Yes,
for that deck.
Correct. But like we said, Targon's really powerful.
Yeah, Targon is really powerful.
Stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that you want to start with. I don't ever really like. Everything else needs to change. Let's not change these two. I always like starting with the cards themselves.
Yeah, I just like Riven feels like it has so few knobs. Like I don't want that card to cost less and be smaller. I don't think like a 2-mana 2/2 Riven is bad. A 2-mana 2/3 Riven is like probably not that great.
2-mana 2/4 is probably too much.
Yeah, exactly. Like the 3-mana 3/4 is kind of where it is. 3-mana 4/4 would make it really, really good. I think you mentioned the problem. Actually, you brought it up. The Reforged cards are kind of bad. Yeah,
I think you need to, if you're going to make Riven good,
and Flip Riven isn't even that big of a payoff.
It's really not. No, making her
a 4/5 that gets double power is like not
kind of win more.
Yeah.
Is a big problem, and her surrounding cards that allow her to reforge are just not great.
Cool. And then One last question, do you think, or did you have something else you wanted to say about this?
No, I think we're good there.
Okay, so from Dr. Beeves in our Discord, it's like, would you like to see more counterspells printed either in Ionia or in different regions? Why or why not? And then someone else responded, or a deny nerf, which is funny, both because deny was definitely too good for a while when it cost three mana.
For sure.
And just like, I think it's really funny, the idea that like deny should cost 5 mana, because that would be a really bad rate. Deny is such an interesting
somehow
card in this
still
game too.
Honestly, probably still playable at 5 mana, which is the crazy thing.
The crazy thing about deny is that it almost doesn't matter how much it costs. Like, obviously there gets a point where it matters, but it's such a unique effect that the cost change didn't really change its effectiveness, but did make it worse, which, I think was obviously good. So what do you think? More counterspells? And if so, should they be in Ionia?
I think that, like you just said, part of the reason it kind of doesn't matter how much it costs is because it's unique. And that uniqueness is what's making not just Deny strong, but Ionia, the region, strong. I think, honestly, it kind of feels like Ionia as a region is being propped up by Deny and Lee Sin.
It's only Deny? Well, it always has been.
Well, I mean, and Lee Sin. But
I mean, if you look at the stats for like play rates and regions and stuff, all regions have a pretty even play rate right now, especially since Grand Plaza like boosted Demacia up. But as far as what cards get played the most in decks, for Demacia it's single combat. For like Bilgewater, it's like Jagged Butcher, and like Twisted Fate is up there.
Yeah.
And for Ionia, it's like 76, 85 something % of decks play Deny, and then like 70% of decks play Nopify. And it's very clear that is what the region is doing right now in the metagame. It is the interaction region.
And because of that, I think that you need to not give another region a card that says counter target spell. I think you need to give other regions something similar. I don't know. The problem is I don't know what you would.
Yeah, it's interesting. So there's stuff like counter target spell that targets you or a unit you control. Spell or skill that targets you or a unit control. So it couldn't counter Runation and it couldn't counter Feel the Rush, but it could counter Vengeance. I don't know if Legend of Runeterra wording protects that, and also that's kind of what Bastion does.
Also, yeah, I mean, I like the flavor of that though, like something that only protects your unit as a counterspell. Like that feels very Demacia to me. Like
that's
sort
what
of
I was
like
just thinking.
Yeah, sort of like a Fight with Honor type.
Because they have this whole thing about like mage seekers in the lore, and
also
them being like they don't like mages, and they like Demacia and like actively hunt down mages. And I think Lux is either prejudiced or like actually hides the fact that she's
Lux hides the fact they don't know she's a mage.
Yeah. So it could be very interesting to have that kind of like, it is a spell that is centered around stopping something that's hurting you from happening, which is kind of like both a fantasy trope. It's something that's done in Magic, and I think just good. Like Fizz almost has a counterspell tacked into his ability that when you play a spell, it cancels all other spells targeting him.
Yeah.
And stuff like that is a good way to have interaction. Stuff like Spell Shield, although Spell Shield is a mechanic that I don't love, especially when it's innately on creatures.
Yeah, I don't love Spell Shield either.
Horrifly is just like a little too oppressive.
Okay, cool. You are joking.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay. Mostly the issue with Spell Shield for me was in Expedition in the early days, where it just felt like all of these giant invoke threats had Spell Shield and Fury, so it was both really hard to trade into them with units and really hard to ever target them, and they were just guaranteed to be like a 3-for-1 often. But that matters a lot less on Invoke. I'm glad that they didn't print like stuff like the Great Beyond as just not having to invoke it straight up a spell that you could put in your deck, because I think that card would be really good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think where I land on this is that we shouldn't give other regions Deny. We should give them something similar, but definitely more limited.
Yeah.
Like you said, something that only counters a spell targeting one of your guys.
If you think about it, the box is kind of a counterspell.
Yeah. Yeah, actually that's not a bad way to think about that card.
Yeah, like it's a timing limited removal spell. Like you could have a thing that said you could have like Vengeance, but it's like a 3-mana slow card and can only hit a unit that entered.
You know what's a lot like a counterspell?
Miscall? Or not Miscall, the other one.
Risen Mist? No, not Risen Mist. No, I think it's called Miscall. The 3-drop fast that revives a random unit that died.
That is a counterspell. Also, Passage Unearned is another 3-drop Shadow Isles card.
Yeah.
Do you remember what that one does?
The one that
all units that entered the it's like obliterate.
Summoned but didn't played.
Yeah.
So something that like got like the Harrowing made them, or
Harrowing, like Escaped Abomination from a Cursed Keeper.
Yeah, Shadow Onslaughts, things that make tokens, things that stuff like that. So there actually are several counterspell adjacent effects.
Yeah, and so like exploring those more rather than actually changing the pie. I can't say I would be like sad if another region got like a very similar card to Deny.
I think if another region got Deny, they couldn't go past one more region.
Yeah.
They shouldn't allow more than 2 regions to have that card, because we'll eventually have like what, 4 more regions? There's
should be
something like that.
I got the little the League of Legends universe lore book as a gift recently, and I think that I counted it up and it's like 3 more. There's like
we have Shurima, we have the Void, and we have
which one's Shurima? It's the desert one.
That's the desert.
There's also like a jungle one that's like Ixtapa or something.
Yes. Anyway.
Yeah, I like Deny where it is. It also is a card that, I'm playing a lot of Deny decks right now. I'm playing Fiora Shen and I'm playing Zoe Lee, and I keep wanting to cut Deny. Like 3 of it and Nopify feels like way too many, and even 3 Deny sometimes feels like too many, because sometimes it's so dead. That's
super funny, because I have 2 Denies in my deck, and every single game I'm like, God damn it, I wish I had the 3rd one. So frequently.
Interesting.
I wish I had the 3rd one. And yes, it's incredibly clunky and useless sometimes, but when it's good, it is the card that wins you the game.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Deny is actually, this was a good time to be answering this question, a huge part of tempo strategies.
Yeah.
Both Fiora Shen and Zoe Lee get to pressure decks like Field Rush that have really expensive spells by just being like, make you answer me, and then when you do, I have a Deny, put me up mana, and maintain my board presence, and then continue applying pressure. And then if they have the second Deny, the game's usually over.
Yeah. Yeah, putting your opponent in a situation where they have to play their spell that wins them the game, and you have Deny, and sometimes they just can't afford to wait, and they just have to go for it and make you have it, and then you usually have it because hopefully you played the game in such a way that made it so you weren't pressured into using your Deny before you wanted to. And that's the other side of that coin, is that your opponent, if they play particularly well, or you get unlucky, or you play poorly, your opponent gets to orchestrate a situation where you're casting Deny on like a Grasp of Undying instead of their Vengeance or their Ruination.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it goes 2 ways. Yeah.
It really does. That looks like all the viewer questions that we have for today. Any closing thoughts, Hugh, about concept of tempo? Any of these questions? The next balance change is still a little while off, but
when is it?
Don't ask me that. I think I heard that it actually might be as late as February.
Oh, wow.
Because I think there might have been like they took a break for Christmas, and then there was a non-balance patch. Is a non-balance patch this Thursday, or was last Thursday? It's my job to know these things. I really should have, but that's my bad. But then the next like we said, there was a break for Christmas, and they said the next patch is not going to be balance changes, and that's the one after that, which is like 2 weeks after that. So there's time for that to shake out, but definitely there's 2 more at least before the next seasonal tournament, I think. Anything else in closing? I think the gauntlet this week is
should be singletons. Yeah. If the pattern remains the same.
Yeah, and when we always post what decks that we're playing in the Discord, and we'll probably link them on Twitter, especially if we do well. And so, you know, you can always ask us.
I got my first Prime Glory from the last one playing a singleton deck. I don't know. Did you get it or did you?
I have one Prime Glory. I got it in the first best of 3.
Oh, okay. That's the one I didn't play.
I lost in the finals, or no, I lost at 5 wins twice in a row to the same deck with the last singleton one, and then last time I just went straight up 0-2 in.
Oh, that's right.
0-2 in the most recent constructed thing. The constructed. I just want to throw a really quick thing out about the constructed gauntlets real quick. This is very different than the kind of tournament prep that we're thinking about for like the seasonal tournament, or the later gauntlets, because some of the later gauntlets are best of 3. When it's best of 1, you should just really, the level 1 strategy should just be to play 3 good decks, because they can only ban one of them, and then you're only going to play one of the other 2. So you don't get to do that thing where you're like, okay, I'll beat your aggro deck twice, or I'll ban your good deck and I'll beat the other ones twice. Yeah. If everyone just has, you know, good decks, you just want decks with like a pretty good matchup spread.
Oh, and please, if you're doing this, don't just necessarily play the 3 quote unquote meta decks.
But best mid-range decks, like
don't just like slam 3 decks you've never played but are supposed to be the best. Play 3 decks you are comfortable with. Because at the end of the day, if you're playing a tier 1.5 deck, but that you've played 100 games on,
so much better. Even 20-30 games on.
Yeah.
I basically got beat twice because I looked at 2 lineups where there was stuff like Teemo Sejuani, there was stuff like Mono Zoe, where I just like didn't have the reps in with my meta decks against, and I just didn't know exactly what to ban or exactly what the matchups were, so I didn't really know what to ban, and I was like kind of confident on my decision, and then I didn't know quite what to play. I was kind of confident on my decision, and maybe had I chose the other one, I would have beat them.
Yeah.
So you get a lot of points. Like, what was your lineup for the most recent one, Hugh?
Tom Raka, Zoe Lee, and Pirates.
Yeah.
I had a very specific plan, but we can. I think we should definitely devote some time in a later episode to our. For
sure. It was actually someone else's that I was thinking of, and they had like Tom Raka, Teemo Sejuani.
That was Jake, I think.
And Ash Sejuani. Or you can't play both Teemo Sejuani. He played Ash Sejuani, Tom Raka, and one other deck. But that doesn't really matter. It's that the other 2 are decks that haven't been seeing a ton of play lately, and so people's new decks they just don't know how good they are against it, and really what to do. So,
yep, exactly.
So just play decks you know, matchups you know, bias towards the decks you're more comfortable with. A lot of people, right, if you put like Go Hard and Zoe Lee in your deck in your matchup, right, can be a good idea because they're going to ban Zoe Lee every time or Go Hard every time, depending on what the current idea is, and then you get to play the other one. Basically, just need to go 7-0 before get 7 wins before you lose twice in a row with Go Hard, and that's not that hard. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. I think that concludes episode 6 of Champ Select. Wow, that's a higher number than I thought it was.
I originally we looked at that before we started, and I was like, that's definitely not right. We're definitely on 5, and then I'm fairly certain we are actually on 6. So I'll look like a pretty huge idiot if we actually are on 5.
Yeah, but excited to see to have all of you tune in next week. Would love to talk to you in the Discord, on several of the Reddit posts, or engaging with us on Twitter. Thank you for listening. See you next week.